They called it a toy, a bouncing box on wheels. To German officers, the little American Jeep looked like a joke, a civilian contraption trying to play soldier. They were used to war machines that roared, tanks, armored cars, half-tracks with steel tracks biting into the earth. The Jeep? It purred like a sewing machine. Light, unarmored, harmless. Or so they thought. But that toy would soon hum across Europe like a phantom. It could climb where tanks couldn't, turn where trucks failed, and appear where the enemy least expected it. It carried men, mortars, stretchers, supplies, and sometimes even entire units across terrain that had swallowed larger machines whole. And on one cold morning in 1944, in the shattered countryside of northern France, the Germans would learn, too late, that this little vehicle could change the rhythm of war itself. This is the story of the Jeep, the American soldier's best friend, the enemy's quiet nightmare, and the machine that turned mobility into a weapon.
Act 1. A Vehicle Without Fear. This act explores how the Jeep was born, a small, desperate idea that became the most important vehicle of the Allied war effort. The story began long before the battlefields of France. In 1940, as Europe burned and America prepared for war, the U.S. Army issued a challenge to the nation's car manufacturers. Build us a light reconnaissance vehicle that can do everything and survive anything. It was an impossible order. The Army wanted something fast, small, light, and strong enough to carry soldiers through mud, snow, and fire, all within 49 days. Only 3 companies dared to try: American Bantam, Willys Overland, and Ford. What emerged from their frantic competition was a miracle of simplicity. A squat, boxy four-wheel drive machine weighing just 2,400 pounds, built to move like a mountain goat and think like a soldier. It was called the Willys MB, but everyone just called it the Jeep. It could climb 60-degree hills, ford rivers, and run for days on a single tank. Soldiers loved it because it went where they went. Generals loved it because it made the impossible possible. In the deserts of North Africa, it outran Rommel's armored scouts. In Sicily and Italy, it scaled goat paths meant for mules. In Normandy, it rolled off landing craft before the sand had even settled. One war correspondent wrote, "The Jeep was as essential to the Allies as the rifle and the radio." To the Americans, it was freedom on 4 wheels. To the Germans, it was confusion on 4 wheels, a machine that broke every rule of mobility and made war move faster than they could think. And that confusion would soon turn deadly.
Act 2. Surprise on the Western Front. This act tells how, during the chaos of 1944, the Jeep's speed and adaptability stunned German forces, allowing U.S. soldiers to outmaneuver armored divisions that were stronger on paper but slower on the ground. By the autumn of 1944, Europe was a chessboard of mud, blood, and broken machines. The German Wehrmacht still fought fiercely across France and Belgium, but their supply lines were choking, their fuel dwindling, and their once fearsome tanks, the Tigers and Panthers, had become heavy, hungry predators in a dying forest. The Americans, by contrast, moved like lightning. Convoys rolled day and night. Infantry divisions appeared where German scouts swore there were none. Messages flew faster than the enemy could react. The secret wasn't in size or strength, it was in mobility. And at the center of that mobility was a humble, 4-wheeled machine that weighed less than a tank's turret, the Jeep. One German officer near the Siegfried Line reportedly wrote, "They are everywhere.
We destroy one and 10 more appear. They move like water. The Jeep allowed American commanders to do something the Germans never expected: wage fluid warfare on terrain thought impassable. When bridges were bombed, Jeeps crossed rivers on makeshift rafts. When tanks bogged down, Jeeps flanked through orchards, over hills, and across ditches. When fuel lines broke, Jeeps ran on whatever could burn: diesel, alcohol, even captured German gasoline. During the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, Jeeps became lifelines. As snow buried roads and the Ardennes froze solid, German armor pushed hard, expecting American mobility to collapse. Instead, convoys of Jeeps tore through backroads and forests, bringing ammunition, rations, and reinforcements where no trucks could pass. They ferried wounded men back through blizzards, headlights covered with cloth to evade enemy aircraft. At Bastogne, where the 101st Airborne was surrounded and starving, Jeeps carrying supplies raced in under shell fire through the narrowest trails. One medic wrote, "The Jeeps came like ghosts. You could hear them before you saw them, engines coughing through snow, and somehow they always made it." Even the Germans, watching from the tree lines, began to realize what they were seeing. Their massive half-tracks sat motionless in the snow, engines frozen, while those tiny American vehicles danced circles around them, fearless, relentless, unstoppable. The machine that had once been laughed at was now rewriting the laws of movement. And with every mile it covered, the Jeep didn't just carry soldiers, it carried momentum.
Act 3. The Machine That Never Slept. This act reveals how the Jeep became far more than a transport, a command post, ambulance, scout, and even a weapon, reshaping battlefield tactics and redefining what a vehicle could do in modern war. By 1944, the Jeep was no longer just a vehicle. It was a phenomenon. On every front, from Normandy's beaches to Italy's mountain passes, it seemed to multiply like a living organism. Soldiers gave it names, painted their units on its hood, and swore that the little machine had a soul. Its design was pure genius. Flat panels that were easy to repair, a low silhouette that made it hard to hit, and a simple four-cylinder engine that could run even when soaked, frozen, or shot full of holes. Mechanics joked that if you can make a fire, you can fix a Jeep. The Germans couldn't understand it. To them, military engineering was an art of precision. Machines like the Panther tank or Kübelwagen, finely tuned but fragile. The Jeep, by contrast, was crude, ugly, and indestructible. And it was everywhere. At dawn, Jeeps carried forward observers to map enemy positions. By noon, they hauled ammunition through shell fire. At night, they evacuated the wounded. Some were fitted with .30 caliber Browning machine guns, turning them into mobile gun platforms. Others were converted into radio command posts, reconnaissance scouts, or makeshift ambulances. In North Africa, General George S. Patton used a Jeep as his personal chariot, standing tall in the passenger seat, ivory-handled pistols gleaming, barking orders through dust and chaos. In France, General Eisenhower famously called the Jeep one of the three tools that won the war, alongside the Dakota transport plane and the bulldozer. But its true magic wasn't in generals or tactics. It was in what it gave the ordinary soldier: freedom. For the first time in military history, small units could move independently, faster than tanks, lighter than trucks, and far deadlier than their size suggested. A squad of 5 men with one Jeep could scout, strike, or escape before the enemy knew they were there. They carried mortars, mounted recoilless rifles, even towed anti-tank guns. Some Jeeps were armored with scrap metal and sandbags. Others stripped down to skeleton frames to move faster across mud and snow.
One paratrooper described it perfectly. It was the one thing that never complained. The men got tired, the tanks broke down, the roads disappeared, but the Jeep, it just kept going. It didn't care about terrain, weather, or odds. It simply obeyed, turning every soldier who drove it into part of something larger, a fast, flexible, unstoppable force. The Germans had superior machines, heavier, stronger, more powerful, but they were chained to roads, bridges, and fuel. The Jeep had no chains. It turned the entire map into a highway. And in that freedom lay its greatest weapon, adaptability.
Act 4. The day the Jeep outran the Panzers. This act tells the story of a real battlefield miracle, when American Jeep units, outnumbered and outgunned, used speed and surprise to outmaneuver German armor, stunning commanders on both sides. It happened in northern France, August 1944, during the Allied breakout known as Operation Cobra. The American advance had finally burst through the hedgerows of Normandy, and the German 7th Army was in full retreat. But that retreat was dangerous. The roads were choked with wreckage. German armor still lurked in ambush along narrow country lanes. The weather was turning, the supply lines thin, and visibility low. American commanders needed eyes, speed, and courage to chase the enemy before he could regroup. They turned to the one machine they trusted most, the Jeep. At dawn, columns of Jeeps from the 2nd Armored Division and the 90th Infantry rolled out ahead of the tanks. Their mission: locate and block retreating German convoys before they could reach the Seine. It was a mission that, on paper, should have belonged to armor or air power. But this time, it was the little Jeeps that would make history. The men called themselves Recon by Fire. They drove straight into danger, engines roaring, radios crackling, .50 caliber guns mounted on their hoods. Outside the town of Avranches, a group of 30 Jeeps spotted a column of German panzers emerging from a wooded road. Panzer IVs and self-propelled guns, massive beasts bristling with steel. For any normal unit, it would have meant annihilation. But instead of retreating, the Jeep crews split into 3 groups and did something no tank crew would ever dare. They charged sideways. Flying across fields, through hedgerows and ditches, the Jeeps used terrain as their ally. Their tires skimmed over soft ground where the heavy panzers sank. Machine guns rattled as drivers swerved between barns and trees, kicking up clouds of dust that blinded the German gunners. The chaos was total. The panzers tried to pivot their turrets, but the Jeeps were too fast. Artillery shells overshot. Radio reports shouted, "Small enemy vehicles, many of them impossible to target." Within 15 minutes, the German column was in disarray. Then came the second punch. American Sherman tanks, guided by those very Jeeps, struck from the flanks and rear. The German formation collapsed. The road to Avranches was open, and the breakout became a flood. That day, the Jeep did something no one had imagined possible. It defeated tanks not with firepower, but with speed and nerve. A captured German officer later said, "We could not understand it. These tiny cars came from everywhere, like hornets from the ground." It wasn't just a victory of mobility. It was a revelation. The Jeep had proven that warfare no longer belonged only to heavy armor or artillery. Agility, adaptability, and sheer audacity could win the day. The soldiers who drove those Jeeps didn't think of themselves as heroes. They were just doing what the machine allowed them to do: move faster than fear.
Act 5. The Soldier's Chariot. This act explores how the Jeep became the heartbeat of the Allied soldiers' daily life, a symbol of freedom, grit, and survival that carried men through every hardship of the front. Long after the guns stopped firing, every soldier who fought in Europe remembered the sound, the low hum of that engine that meant help, hope, or home. The Jeep was everywhere, and for the men who lived in foxholes and moved through ruin, it was more than a vehicle, it was a lifeline. It carried food when the kitchens couldn't reach the front. It held ammunition when the roads disappeared. It carried wounded men away from chaos, often with medics sitting on the hood, holding IV bottles in the freezing wind. In Italy, the jeeps became mountain goats, bouncing along cliffside trails that horses feared to cross. In the Ardennes, they plowed through snow so deep it buried trucks and horses alike. In France, they ferried mail, priests, nurses, and even prisoners, because the war didn't stop for any of them, and neither did the Jeep. It was so dependable that soldiers began decorating them like family members. Some painted names on the hood: Sweet Lorraine, Liberty Bell, Lucky Gem. Others welded coffee tins to the sides to hold letters or cigarettes. One unit in Belgium even fitted their Jeep with a phonograph, turning it into a rolling morale machine. In the evenings, when the sky went quiet, men leaned against their jeeps to eat cold rations, smoke, and stare at the horizon. In the mornings, the same jeep would roll to life, carrying them back into the fight. It was a companion that never complained, never stopped, never forgot. One soldier wrote home, "If the jeep could talk, it'd cuss like us, pray like us, and still be ready by dawn." It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't armored, it wasn't invincible. But it was there, always, and that made it sacred. When peace finally came, soldiers wept, saying goodbye to the little machines that had carried them through hell. Some even tried to ship them home, writing petitions to the army. "We'd pay for the gas, we just want to keep her." But most jeeps were left behind, rusting in barns, buried in mud, or sold for scrap. Yet their spirit lived on in every soldier who'd ever gripped that small steering wheel, stared down a storm of steel, and kept driving forward. Because the Jeep wasn't just a tool of war, it was a promise that no matter how bad things got, someone, somewhere, was still moving.
Act 6. When the Jeep became a legend. This act follows the Jeep's transformation from a wartime utility vehicle into an icon of freedom, a symbol recognized by allies and enemies alike as the machine that changed the face of modern warfare. By 1945, the war was winding down, but the legend of the Jeep was just beginning. Everywhere the Allies went, the Jeep went too, across France, Belgium, Luxembourg, Holland, and finally into Germany itself. When American forces rolled through the shattered streets of Cologne and the smoking ruins of Berlin, it wasn't just the Shermans or Pershings that led the way. It was the Jeeps, small and fearless, bouncing through rubble like sparks of life among the ashes of a dying empire. To the German civilians who watched from basements and doorways, the sight was surreal. Tiny, open-topped vehicles filled with young men grinning beneath steel helmets, engines humming like bees in the ruins of what had once been invincible. And in that moment, something powerful shifted. The Jeep had come to represent not just mobility, but liberation. Children ran after them, waving and laughing. Villagers draped flowers over their hoods. In liberated towns, people wrote "Merci America" across Jeep windshields. Priests blessed them. Farmers offered eggs and bread to their drivers. It became the face of the Allied advance, the friendly machine of the free. Even the Germans, after surrender, could not help but respect it. Captured Wehrmacht mechanics studied its simplicity with disbelief. One German engineer reportedly said, "This machine is too simple to break and too clever to copy." When the war ended, thousands of Jeeps were left scattered across Europe and Asia in barns, forests, and fields. But they didn't rust for long.
Farmers turned them into tractors. Doctors used them as ambulances. Villages used them to rebuild their homes. In the Pacific, Jeeps became taxis, school buses, even wedding cars. It was as if the little machine, built for destruction, had chosen instead to live for creation. And as veterans returned home, the Jeep came with them. Not physically at first, but in spirit. When the Willys Overland Company launched its civilian version in 1945, the CJ2A, they didn't have to invent a reputation. The war had already written it for them. The advertisement said it simply: "The sun never sets on the Jeep." And they were right. From deserts to jungles, from city streets to mountain trails, the Jeep had become the universal machine, not of conquest, but of endurance. It was the proof that the greatest weapons are not always those that destroy, but those that survive and carry others with them.
Act 7. From War to the World, the Jeep's Second Life. This act traces how the Jeep transcended war, becoming a global symbol of resilience, ingenuity, and freedom, evolving from a soldier's tool into a civilian legend that reshaped entire nations. When the guns went silent, the world began to rebuild, and the Jeep was already waiting. From the jungles of Burma to the cobblestone streets of Paris, thousands of surplus Jeeps sat scattered across continents. Some were battered, their tires shredded and paint faded by dust and war. Others were pristine, parked and forgotten when peace came too suddenly to need them. But wherever they were found, people didn't see them as relics of conflict. They saw them as opportunities. In Europe, farmers strapped plows to the back and used them to till soil that had been cratered by bombs. In the Pacific Islands, teachers used them to deliver books to remote villages. In Africa and India, missionaries and doctors loaded them with supplies to reach places no truck could travel. Even the military couldn't part with them. The Jeep became the template for armies worldwide. From the British Land Rover to the Russian GAZ-67 to France's Hotchkiss M201. Each nation tried to build its own version, but none captured the same effortless balance of simplicity and soul. And as America rebuilt, the Jeep found a new life at home. The Willys CJ2A, civilian Jeep, rolled off production lines and onto farms, ranches, and highways. Its advertisement showed a farmer and a soldier shaking hands beside it. The message clear: the machine that won the war could now win peace. It became a cultural symbol, woven into the story of America itself, rugged, reliable, and free. Families drove it into the wilderness. Explorers crossed deserts with it. Even presidents rode in them: Eisenhower, Truman, and later Kennedy, waving from open-top Jeeps that at once carried generals into battle. The Jeep had gone from a weapon of necessity to a monument of resilience. And as the world entered the Cold War, it carried not bombs or soldiers, but the memory of what mobility and cooperation could achieve. Because in a strange, poetic way, the Jeep had done something no general ever could. It had connected the world. From France to the Philippines, from Africa to Alaska, people recognized its shape, that square grille, that soft growl of the engine, that unshakable spirit. It no longer belonged to one army. It belonged to everyone.
Act 8. The Myth and the Memory. This act explores how the Jeep became more than a machine, a living symbol of endurance, identity, and brotherhood, preserved in memory, film, and culture long after the war faded into history. Time has a way of turning machines into myths, and few machines earned that honor like the Jeep. By the 1950s, it had already become legend,
not just in military museums or motor shows, but in the hearts of those who had driven it through fire. Veterans would gather and tell stories not of medals or battles, but of their jeeps. The night it outran a panzer, the river it forded, the wounded friend it carried back through shell fire. They remembered how it smelled of oil and mud, how it rattled when climbing hills, and how it somehow never stopped, even when everything else did. In those stories, the Jeep wasn't a tool. It was a comrade. Hollywood took notice. By the 1960s, the Jeep appeared in films, comic books, and advertisements as a symbol of American courage and ingenuity. War movies showed it bouncing through Europe with soldiers laughing in the back. Adventure films turned it into the explorer's trusted steed, crossing jungles and deserts. Its silhouette, 7 vertical grille slots and round headlights, became an icon recognized across the globe. But beyond the myth and nostalgia, there remained a deeper truth. The Jeep had changed the way humans thought about movement. It proved that victory was not just about might, but about mobility, creativity, and the courage to move when others stood still. Decades after the war, aging veterans would visit restored Jeeps at memorials. Some would reach out and touch the hood, feeling the cold metal as if greeting an old friend. Others would stand silently, remembering those who never made it home, the ones who had sat beside them in that same rumbling seat. A few words were often whispered then, carried on the wind at reunions and cemeteries. She got us there. She got us back. The Jeep had become a vessel of memory, not just of war, but of endurance. Every dent, every scar, every gear shift told the story of humanity's stubborn will to move forward, no matter the terrain. And that is why, even today, no modern vehicle truly replaces it. Because the Jeep was never just built. It was forged in the chaos of war and tempered by the spirit of those who refused to surrender.
Act 9. The Spirit That Never Died. This act reflects on how the Jeep's legacy lives on in modern warfare, engineering, and everyday life. An eternal symbol of adaptability, courage, and motion that still echoes through every machine built since. 80 years after it first rolled onto the battlefield, the sound of the Jeep's engine still resonates, not just in museums or parades, but in every four-wheeled vehicle that dares to go where roads end. Its DNA runs through every modern military transport, every rugged SUV, every off-road expedition vehicle on Earth. When you hear the growl of a Humvee, the whisper of a Land Rover, or the steady hum of a Wrangler, you're hearing the Jeep's descendants, machines that carry its heart. But the legacy of the Jeep isn't just mechanical, it's human. In every place where soldiers still depend on their vehicles, where engineers improvise in the mud, where disaster relief teams crawl through broken cities to bring food and medicine, the spirit of the Jeep is there. It's in every bolt tightened under flashlight, every tire patched in the rain, every driver who whispers, "Come on, girl," to a machine that just won't quit. The Jeep taught humanity something profound, that greatness isn't built in the factory, it's earned in the field. It showed that perfection isn't about armor or luxury, but about reliability, about being there when everything else fails. Modern armies may fly drones and drive armored carriers, But even now, in every U.S. military base, you'll still find a Jeep or its modern twin, dusty, dented, and somehow still running. And in the developing world, Jeeps from the 1940s still rumble through markets and mountain trails, engines coughing but alive, stubborn relics of a time when machines were made to serve men, not outshine them. The Jeep's spirit is not nostalgia, it's motion. It's what happens when necessity, courage, and ingenuity collide. It's a reminder that sometimes the simplest ideas, a box on wheels built for men who refuse to stop, can reshape the course of history. And so, in every dusty road, in every convoy, in every trail that disappears into fog, the Jeep still drives on, not as a ghost, but as a promise. Because in war, it carried soldiers. In peace, it carried nations. And in memory, it carries us all.
Act 10. The Road That Never Ends. Final reflection and call to action. This final act closes the journey, turning the story of the Jeep into a meditation on endurance, innovation, and the eternal drive that defines both man and machine. In the end, the Jeep was never just a machine of war. It was a symbol of motion itself. Born from desperation, built in record time, and tested in the crucible of global conflict, it outlived empires, generals, and battlefields. It became more than the sum of its bolts and gears. It became the spirit of a generation that refused to stop, no matter how rough the road ahead. On the muddy paths of Normandy, on the frozen trails of Bastogne, and through the shattered streets of Berlin, the Jeep carried not only soldiers, but an idea that movement is survival, that freedom is not a destination, it's the courage to keep driving when everything says stop. To the German commanders, it began as a joke, an odd little box that rattled like a toy. But when the smoke cleared, that same box had carried armies, liberated cities, and changed how wars were fought forever. And even now, in jungles, deserts, mountains, and distant battlefields, that same humble design still whispers through the years. Not through words, but through its rhythm, through the hum of an engine, the crunch of tires on stone, the sound of purpose meeting perseverance. Because the Jeep didn't just help win a war, it helped humanity remember what it means to endure. So when you see one, on a quiet country road, on a film screen, or sitting forgotten in a barn, know that it's more than metal. It's a reminder of courage without comfort, of invention born from chaos, of ordinary men and machines that did extraordinary things, not for glory, but because someone had to keep moving. That's the legacy of the Jeep. A war machine that became a peace symbol. A box on wheels that carried freedom farther than anyone dreamed possible. The road it began on never really ended. It simply kept going, through history, through memory, through us. They built it to scout, not to fight. But in the mud, the snow, and the fire, it became something greater. A symbol of grit, of motion, of men who refused to stop. The Jeep wasn't just a machine, it was a heartbeat with wheels. And even now, decades later, its echo still hums across every open road, because what it carried wasn't just soldiers, it carried freedom. If this story moved you, share it.
Let others remember the men, the machines, and the miracles that shaped our world. This is Hidden Frontlines, where the forgotten engines of war still speak, and every story drives us closer to the truth. Subscribe, remember, and keep the wheels turning.